Hey, everybody, welcome back to Relish This, the Nonprofit Marketing Podcast. I'm your host, Stu Swineford. I'm one of the co-founders of Relish Studio. We're a digital marketing agency committed to helping nonprofits thrive. My guest today is Rob Smariga, and he is the Director of Operations and Finance at BSCS Science Learning. They are a really cool organization that's been around for like 62 years, and their mission is to transform science teaching and learning through research-driven innovation. Today, I wasn't sure exactly how much value I was going to be able to bring to the table, given their history and their success over the years. And we had a really cool conversation that brought out a whole lot of fun things to think about for any nonprofit, regardless of how long you've been around. And I think the big takeaway was when we started talking about the value exchange and creating a value ladder where you're escalating the value and the exchange of information and engagement that goes on between your organization and your constituents or your stakeholders. And one of the really cool things about that is that you can think a little bit outside of the box in terms of what you're bringing. You don't have to come at things straight on all the time. And coming up with ways to just add value and be altruistic and be authentic can really help transition your organization in terms of its outreach and its ability to get people into the fold. So I really hope that you enjoy this show. I think there's a lot of really fun, great information, and here we go. Fantastic. Well, thanks so much for being on the show today, Rob. You and I go back a few years. We originally did some work with you back when you were at the Association for Experiential Education. And now you are with the BSCS. I think I have that sort of right. There's a science learning component to that too. So BSCS Science Learning. Tell us a little bit about BSCS and your role there.
Nice talking with you today, Stu. BSCS Science Learning, more than a 60-year-old organization, originally started as a National Science Foundation funded project through CU Boulder to develop a biological sciences classroom curriculum, and that's the BSCS, Biological Sciences Curriculum Study, the roots of the organization. But it has expanded over those decades to work in all disciplines of science beyond biology. And so a couple of years ago, the rebranding to the name away from simply biology reflected that expansion of the organization's mission.
Gotcha.
It's an organization that has changed and grown over the past 10 years, not simply beyond its simple disciplinary focus on biology to include chemistry and physics and earth sciences, environmental sciences, and other areas, but it's also really broadened in the type of work that it does and in how it does that work.
Right.
We are now an organization that has three pillars: conducting basic research in educational practices, development of instructional materials and curriculum for the K-12 classroom, and professional development and professional learning for teachers. And those have become three equal pillars, and that's fairly recent for the organization. It's also an organization that has grown in how it does its work from having a fairly stable number of staff, around 25 or 30, based in Colorado Springs, to now almost double that, about 60 staff that are working across 16 different states. So we have a much more distributed workforce now. So it's an organization for its age has gone through a fair amount of transformation.
Has it always been a nonprofit organization, or did it start as a for-profit and transition? What's the history of the organization itself?
The roots were simply a funded project at the university for for probably somewhere between 5 and 10 years before it did spin off away from CU and into a nonprofit.
Okay. Well, that's cool. And basically, you are helping empower and educate educators in terms of curriculum and how to better lead their classrooms. Is that sum things up pretty well?
Yeah, it's all about a better science education experience for kids in elementary, middle, and high schools.
That's great. What are the main what's the main methodology for your process? Are you out in classrooms, looking and seeing how things are done and really like boots on the ground kind of stuff, or how does your organization work in that matter?
If you go back 9 months and before, yes, there's a lot of in-room observation and interaction and working with students and teachers. That is all ended, and we've had to adapt and do much more virtual interaction with teachers and students. But both for the research component of the work that we do, testing curriculum to see what moves the needle in effectiveness and testing approaches in teacher professional learning to see what makes a difference both in the teacher's practices and in the learning gains for the students. There's a lot of engagement in the classroom for data collection and observations, and most of the professional development with teachers is designed to be in-person experiences.
Yeah. How have you guys pivoted this year in terms of going fully virtual? I can see there potentially being some benefits to that in the collection and recording of that virtual classroom setting could potentially be augmented this year, but sounds like it's definitely been a pivot for you.
So it is initially back in March, April, and May. It felt like hard work and it felt like a short-term need to respond to an unexpected situation. As we've had further time to reflect on this and step back and look at really how we're adapting. The shifts we've made to collect video of the classroom from teachers rather than being in person to observe what they're doing. The strategies we've built to connect teachers together for sharing in a Zoom environment rather than bringing them together into a conference room for sharing. We now have the opportunity to expand our reach as we go forward. And if we can really figure out how to deepen the impact of these virtual strategies now, it may open us up to just reaching far more students and teachers than we had been when we were focused solely on traveling out to the school.
Yeah, I could see that being incredibly scalable in terms of that one-to-many kind of component where you could bring teachers in from all over the world potentially, but certainly throughout the United States into a single learning scenario where that would take incredible resources to do in an in-person kind of capacity. Are you guys using breakout rooms and things like that are part of the Zoom experience? Those are some ways to, when you have a large group, create segmentation opportunities within that large group to get more of a hands-on kind of feel.
Yep, we do it, and we do that both in the professional learning we're doing with teachers, but also in our staff interactions, our staff meetings, and our staff professional development. We do an awful lot of full group sessions in a single Zoom, and then split folks up into breakout rooms.
Right. That's great.
It's been interesting to see how our use of we've been a Zoom shop for years, having a distributed workforce and
Right.
and so many remote staff. It's been our norm for connecting our staff. And now that we're doing more of it and more meetings online here the past 9 months, it's interesting to see how we're finding more and more ways to utilize these tools.
It's great. I think just looking for those opportunities. I mean, I think people in general tend to get blinders on in terms of the initial freak out in terms of things have changed and oh no, how am I going to do this thing? But it's great to see the ability and taking advantage of that opportunity to open that up and say, well, this is actually a real potential game changer for your organization in terms of how you interact, or just adding another tool to the toolbox in terms of potentially how things go forward to help reach more people. I think it's cool to hear that you're doing that.
We were fortunate to already be well positioned to go into a fully virtual environment, because we had some aspect of virtual teams already in our work. Those tended to be more often to be 5 people sitting in an office, a meeting room together, and 2 or 3 people connecting through Zoom.
Right.
But we have the communication systems already in place, and the practices of including virtual staff. That it wasn't a great stretch for us to then flip to, all right, everyone is solely
right.
connected through Zoom.
Right.
We already had established practices of using online collaboration tools, Google Drive, Box, Dropbox, for sharing files and collaborating on documents. We've seen other tools start to be used. Jamboard for collecting written contributions and facilitate complementing Zoom conversations for interaction right there in the online space. I've seen some staff do really creative stuff using Prezi. And this was new to me. I had no idea that Zoom and Prezi had built an integration. And I've seen some staff do some really interesting presentations in Zoom with their Prezi integrated right there on their camera view.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. Prezi is a really cool program. It is fun to see how this need for technology and this need for big technological jumps is certainly fueling that software as a service industry at this point. It's cool to see people innovating and being willing, and other people, so the other stakeholders being willing to experiment and to try new things and to see what's working and really think outside the box in terms of how to bring their message to people in a virtual environment. It's great to hear that you guys have pivoted so effectively there. I was going to ask about your curricula. Has that changed a lot given the situation we've been in this year?
There has been little adaptation of the curriculum to this point, and that's largely a factor of how long it takes in the curriculum development process, and there just hasn't been this amount of time that we've been virtual to pivot.
Right.
It's likely that, well, the first thing to acknowledge is all of the curriculum that we put together is largely produced and distributed in a digital format to begin with.
Okay.
The day of most curriculum being a printed book that's handed out to students in the classroom is diminishing. What we haven't had the time yet, and so that's what comes up in the next few years, is now adapting that curriculum for more effective facilitation in that virtual environment between the teacher and the student.
Right. Yeah, I could see
that requires rethinking the discussion questions that are embedded in the curriculum, the exercises that are part of the curriculum, how science kits are designed to accompany the lessons.
Absolutely. I mean, science is such a hands-on experience. At least, well, it's been a minute since I've been in high school or junior high for that matter. But I can't imagine that has changed dramatically or drastically. It is such a tactile experience, and so figuring out how to run effective classrooms in a remote scenario when you have something that is that hands-on, it certainly seems like a challenge.
And this really raises a larger strategic question for an organization like ours about the time frame that we do decision making around this virtual environment.
Mm-hmm.
How much of this do we expect to be lasting in the long term, if not permanent, and how much of a return to the in-person activity, the in-person classroom in our scope of mission, teachers coming together in a conference room, how much of that do we expect to return at some point? And
right.
and so that's one, that's the strategic question we're wrestling with. How do we balance our resources and bet on the right product mix for those two possible directions in the future?
Well, or this weird middle version of that, where the new normal becomes, opportunities to have in-person and virtual, and
yes.
then what's the best course of action for teachers there, where you some days you're in person and some days you're not, and how do you keep up with that, particularly as it evolves so quickly? I mean, that was one of the things that people were telling me all the time, particularly as we started to approach the new school year and got into the new school year this fall, when they had kids. And Tuesday it was okay, we're fully on board, we're going to meet in person starting next Monday. Wednesday it's like, nope, we're not doing that, we're going to do a half and half or not at all, and just this moving target that has been the classroom this year.
Yes.
Has been a real challenge for people as parents. I can't imagine how challenging that is as a teacher as well, when you've teed up your lesson plan and you think you have everything raring to go for next week, and then you have the potential of some portion of your class needing online and some portion of your class needing in person, and it's just lots of challenges, which are certainly opportunities for you guys to figure out the best methodology there, right?
We haven't figured out where to go with curriculum yet, with instructional materials, but we have now developed that full spectrum of offerings for teacher professional learning, teacher professional development, that have the course that's fully online, a fully in-person experience for the teachers that we've been offering for years. And now we're complementing that with a fully online professional development experience and a hybrid that takes components of the in-person and the virtual together. And that we believe is viable for the long term.
Yeah, I think so. It also allows you to reach places that you normally wouldn't be able to afford to go. For example, more rural and remote places. I mean, it just cannot. It's not cost effective to go to some place in the middle of Kansas to get in front of a science teacher for you guys. And so being able to bring that learning to the masses is, I think that's a fantastic, outcome of what most people see as a fairly negative run that we've had here.
Yeah, you really hit on the value proposition there, that in-person training was almost always purchased by a district. The consumer was the district. And we really see that this online, solely online offering can now be a collection of individual teachers signing up from all across the country and coming together and receiving of the same value that their district wasn't able to purchase for them in our past offering.
Yeah. So is that part of your revenue model, is selling access to your programs? I know that you accept donations as well, but what other stakeholders do you have in your, kind of in your system?
We have four primary sources of revenue. Federal grants accounts for about 50% of our revenue. And those federal grants largely support our research activities. We get about a third of our revenue from foundation grants, and the foundation work is split fairly equally between the curriculum development, creating new instructional materials, and taking teacher professional development to districts that don't have the budget to fully support it.
So kind of like a scholarship.
Yeah. And then the third revenue source are those districts and state educational departments that do have the budget to pay for it directly themselves. And then the fourth is individual donors, and that's way down the list, number 4 for us.
Yeah, I mean you've taken foundation grants and federal grants represent about almost 90% of your revenue.
Yeah.
So the other two buckets are pretty small.
Yeah.
Do you have a desire to grow any of those? I mean, have federal grants, are they as robust as they were? Those tend to be longer term. At least that's my understanding, is that they tend to be multi-year type of engagements or grants. So you may not have seen a budget crunch there. Have you seen, and perhaps it's the same with foundational grants, that you've locked those in, so you're not seeing that have a negative move this year yet. What are you predicting for those two of your largest buckets in the coming years?
Yeah, the typical length of a federal grant or foundation grant for us is 3 to 5 years, and our current projection for the next 3 years is really strong. We have grants in place to carry out the bulk of our current work out through 2023, and solid relationships that we reasonably expect continuing support. We are making a pretty significant effort to build out our fundraising capacity and our outreach directly to school districts, school systems, and state departments. To grow the capacity of the organization to do the work that a federal agency or foundation is not interested in supporting.
Okay.
We recognize that there are schools and teachers that we are not reaching. We recognize that there are offerings that we're not delivering today because there's been no grantor willing to support it.
Okay, so you're seeing opportunities in places you'd like to go. You just need to develop the revenue stream to fund your outreach into those into those zones.
Yeah.
What are you doing to to increase individual donors? And I guess that last bucket is the last bucket's sort of a cart horse situation because you need to reach more districts to get more revenue from districts. So it really comes down to it sounds like there's some of that can come out of your foundation grants, but also you're really bucketing that from your individual donor grant or donor.
We're building out for the first time for this organization a marketing capacity and a fundraising capacity to push in those two areas. And for an organization that whose model has simply been write a grant proposal, put it in, and if it's funded, we do the work. This proactive effort to reach customers, to attract customers, and to build donor relationships to fund this effort is brand new, and it's a real change in approach.
Yeah, it's certainly it opens up a lot of other questions for you in terms of what what activities you're approaching or what activities you're engaging in, particularly in both of those areas in terms of knowing how to get in front of the right people in the districts to have them sign on. So I'd be interested to learn what you're doing there, as well as how do you increase your brand footprint so that more donors understand what you're doing and sign on to help out.
Yeah. So both of these efforts are very recent for us. We're just in the beginning stages. This year has been the first year that we've really starting to build out the capacity and the beginning efforts in this direction. So I don't think I have little to offer anyone in this direction yet.
Right.
We'll have to get together again in a year, and I can talk about our progress in this path.
Well, certainly, I'd love to continue our conversation in a year. In the meantime, what are your plans? Do you have mailing lists that you're leveraging? Are you potentially? It seems like you probably know who most of the districts are, or that's information that's findable.
Yeah.
And so, getting in front of whether that's coming into a kind of a bottom up, so targeting science teachers and getting them to get the decision makers on board, or coming at it from a top down perspective where you get the decision maker who then gets the science teachers on board. My guess is that coming at that from both those directions would be effective, particularly if you have some insight into those two areas of influence. So that's from the district side. From the donor side, certainly again that starts with an understanding of those markets and who's passionate about this, and then getting your name out in front of those people in order to have them help fuel that growth.
Yeah, in terms of marketing out to the educational community, you described that accurately. On the top down into the educational system, we build on relationships with district superintendents, with district science supervisors, with state education directors and state science supervisors in the educational department, and that's really to find those opportunities for a district-wide offering, district support, professional development, and then for the entirely online experience where teachers can sign up themselves. That's an outreach. It's a much more of a mass marketing effort, going out to science teachers across the country and simply promoting the opportunity, the registration opportunity for that class. So there really are two different directions that we're promoting the professional development opportunities. Much more focused, relationship-based outreach to states and district high-level staff, and then the mass marketing effort to teachers on a broad scale for the online registration.
Yeah, absolutely. I did a search, and I don't remember exactly who this was for. I was doing some research for them, and they were in the educational space as well. And, I started that search just on LinkedIn just to see what the opportunity was. And, you can get fairly granular on LinkedIn in terms of reaching out to very specific people within the educational system. And there are a lot who are on LinkedIn. My guess is that that's probably not exactly the place that they're busy playing. They probably have profiles more for professional movement as they look to move from district to district or from job to job. But my guess is that they're not as active as would be great for you guys. I would probably go to other social networks, particularly when you're trying to reach out to teachers, in terms of depending upon the demographic of the teacher that you're trying to reach. Start thinking about age. That will give you a feel for where they might be going to, for social interaction online. And then those would be the places to start trying to get some targeting going and just brand awareness. I think that's where I would start. You could also look at some retargeting opportunities, particularly if there are other organizations that do similar things to what you do. There's some nifty SEO, pay-per-click kind of options there where you can actually start targeting people who've done searches for competitors or have landed on competitor sites. You can retarget and just start getting your name in front of these people whom so just building brand awareness.
Do you think there are opportunities in the traditional teacher associations that have been around for decades, whether in our space it's the National Science Teacher Association, or the National Education Association, those sorts of organizations that have existed for a long time to serve professional networks for different types of teachers?
So obviously, events and conferences have taken a big hit as they've needed to move. But a lot of those a lot of those entities have pivoted pretty effectively in the wake of the pandemic, and so they're doing a lot of the same things that you guys are doing in terms of bringing people together in a more virtual scenario. Normally, they would have sponsorship type opportunities. They would have speaking type opportunities. So I would say that those would be places to hit as well, just to see what they're doing. They may be, creating webinar options and opportunities, and are trying to help continuing education in that space where you could put some of your team in front of them. And I would come at that from the perception of a purely altruistic standpoint, where you're just trying to help educate. But obviously there's your name and organization are attached to that engagement. So, instead of going in and actually trying to give them some sort of pitch to join your program, just provide, valuable, informative information in terms of trends, or what ways to run a science program in a virtual situation. Just answering some of the questions that they have, and really focusing on those things that are keeping them up at night. And if you have resources that you can help share in that space, and that provides that kind of information, that tends to create that relationship. So we tend to think of marketing as really less about trying to sell things and more about trying to build a relationship. And that tends to start with value exchange. And I provide something that helps your life out. You provide something that helps my life out. And we do that 6 or 7 times. And all of a sudden we have a relationship. And those are the things that tend to be really valuable in the long term. So, that's something that we have started doing, or we've always done it, but we really leaned into it hard this year in terms of just being a resource and just providing, information that helps people today get through whatever they're struggling with, and without a super big concern in terms of if that turns into some sort of sales opportunity. So, I think that following that mode would be a valuable way for you guys to build that trust and to build, start creating those relationships.
Do you differentiate value between a placement on a social site and a paid ad on someone's website?
In terms of the perception of that value, so social tends to be relationship driven, and so I think people are keyed up, and certainly this has gotten a little muddy over the years as all of the social media, all of the platforms have started having sponsored content and paid advertising kind of meld into the actual, social component of what they do. So people are starting to get pretty savvy there. But certainly if there's a perception in social that the goal is less about making a sale or creating some sort of transactional relationship, and more about building that relationship and helping from an altruistic standpoint, I think that becomes a fairly valuable tool that you can leverage for great effect. Now, display ads are still incredibly powerful, particularly for brand awareness. And so that's where I think a combination of those two things, and one of the things that we see is even with the paid ads where you're just doing display ads, the clicks are certainly important in terms of getting people to take an action or to go to your site or to do a thing. But there's also value in just reinforcing that brand and making sure that people have a good understanding that you exist and what it is you do, and what how you're going to make people's lives better. Obviously the end goal is to get somebody to take an action, but in the interim, just building that brand awareness can be really valuable as well. So that's why when we work with people in a a paid search capacity, one of the things that we want to just reiterate in that engagement is that it's not just about the traffic. There's a longer term play that's going on as well. And so, it's kind of like when you do a search for some shoes and then all of a sudden those shoes are showing up everywhere you go. Eventually you may click on that to go buy the shoes, or you might just go back to wherever it was that you searched for them in the first place. But the fact that is being reinforced in your in your digital experience over and over again, can compel a person to take an action.
We're good at thinking about on our programs and services side of how everything we do is reinforcing and complementary, and so we provide the instructional materials for the classroom, and then we have a set of resources available that's the minimal engagement for the teacher to support their use of that curriculum, and then step up to different levels of professional development to go deeper into their competency with the material. You have me thinking about, on the communication side, on the marketing side, how do we scaffold different types of outreach efforts that mirrors that scaffolding of our programs and services?
Yeah, a lot of times we call that the value ladder. I didn't come up with that phrase. Can't remember where I first came across that. But anyway, it's essentially just an exchange of value for something else of value. And so in a for-profit capacity, and this also works in nonprofits, but in a for-profit capacity, the initial exchange of value might be some resource or informational element for somebody's email address. And then from there, you try and get them into a fiscal transactional relationship where you try and sell them something very small, like a $7 download of an ebook or something like that. And then you escalate that to a $50 workbook. And then you escalate that to a $200 webinar. And then all of a sudden you're essentially moving them up this value exchange, where you're providing value at every step. And the exchange goes from just an email to a monetary transaction. And a lot of times in the donor space, we see that a similar situation that happens, where if you have the opportunity to bring volunteers in, a lot of times getting people to give you their time as a volunteer in exchange for some feel good stuff and maybe some labor and an experience, that then those volunteers, you can then transition them from a volunteer to a donor, and from a donor to kind of a super donor, and from a super donor to potentially bringing their corporate entity on as a corporate donor. So again, just looking at ways to escalate that relationship and escalate that value exchange. So I think that that display ads and advertising certainly continues to be a viable place to play. People have gotten obviously way more savvy and a little bit blind to those kinds of display ads, but we do still pick up on those even on a subconscious level. And so just getting that brand awareness out there is super important. What I think might be kind of interesting for you guys to explore is what are some of these things that you've been doing for years that you're really good at in terms of like Zoom communication within your team, because teachers and educators and and the educator staff are struggling with that. That's not their normal mode of interaction. And so even just bringing like, your methodology to running a great collaborative Zoom meeting, or how to leverage these additional tools within Zoom to really bring that to life, like that would be a valuable thing that would get people engaged with your brand. And even though it's a little tangential to your core mission and what you're really trying to bring to the table, if you exchange that value and you say, hey, here's this thing, we just want to make you better educators, here's this thing for free, now you're in their sphere of influence. And and that can be a really great leaping off point to that next thing. Like, do you want to have a conversation about how you can improve your the way that you teach science? And it just goes from there.
That's a really creative way to think about it still.
Well, thanks. Yeah, it's all just about building trust, and creating those relationships, and just being authentic around it too. Just trying to help out is one of the things that we've found has been very effective. Do you guys have big pushes toward the end of the year? We're kind of entering that giving season. There are a couple. There's Giving Tuesday and Giving Day Colorado coming up. Are you pushing at all in that capacity, or is this more of a 2021 thing that you're exploring?
We're right now really only geared up for an annual year-end ask, and so we engage around the giving days that come ahead of that.
Okay, yeah, I mean, it's the season really. We're finding with nonprofits in general is certainly there's a push toward the end of the year, and it really, I mean, it also depends on when your fiscal year wraps up in terms of what's most important for you. There is just a lot of awareness, but there's, it can also get really busy. And one of the things that we've seen be fairly successful is coming in after the fact. And, even when people are wrapping things up at the end of the year, coming in at the first of the year and saying, hey, there's still opportunities to give, and just trying to keep people engaged. And, so that's certainly something that we've seen work.
Yeah, we're dividing our strategy sort of in two different tiers of gift, and so the small donors that for us largely go up to $1,000. Right. Those gifts are maxing out at $500 to $1,000, and that's more of the mass appeal. That's the year-end ask, and those are mass communications during the year, just staying in touch with them. And then what are for us larger gifts of four figures is all work and relationships. It's introductions to people from individuals within our network, and those are much longer term development of prospects and working towards
right.
it. And that effort, we've been doing the annual appeal for a while, and it's that development of that prospect development and working towards larger gifts that's going to be new for us.
Right. Well, another thing that is can be super beneficial is trying to get people on monthly gifting. So instead of just asking for one donation of $1,000, which might seem, challenging for people, is to try to get them on, a $75 or $100 donation per month. So that gets you in that same range. It's a lot lighter ask. And then it actually gives you the opportunity to ooch them up over the course of their engagement with you. So not only do they get a kind of a dopamine hit on on a monthly basis as opposed to once a year, because they can feel good about giving year round, but also, also you can ask for more, and you can say, hey, we have a match opportunity, or you're at the $50 per month level. At the $65 per month level, we can do this much more, and just kind of over time, just get them, escalate that engagement.
There's a financial value to my organization with that monthly commitment. If you had a regular, steady inflow of cash throughout the year, and go back and ask them again every year. That is just on autopilot, and it just keeps on coming, and it's a lot harder to stop it. The donor has to take an action to stop it rather than take an action to make the gift.
Yeah, for sure. And it does help with cash flow and predictability and some of those things. So might try and create an ask in that realm as well as you're moving into this giving year. So make your donation last all year, or some kind of language around that.
That's a good thought.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks so much for being on the show. First question for you is do you have any big takeaways from our conversation today? Things that you might take back to the team?
Well, the big takeaways are here in the last part of our conversation, both around some ideas for outreach in our marketing efforts, and some ideas for trying our fundraising approach. Yeah.
Awesome. And then I appreciate that. Then the last thing that I try to ask all my guests, and this comes out of my desire for action. There's always a lot of talk out there, and one of the things I really like to try and leave our listeners with is something that they can go do today to make the world a better place. And so, if you had something for our listeners to do, to take in action, what would you have them do today? Or this week?
I find that a difficult question in this world that we're living in today, because so much of my thoughts around that are shaped by the needs for interaction that we have in these largely isolated lives that we're living. But I feel like I should go to my core values with that answer, and maybe it fits in with this virtual world too. But I have one of my guiding principles is always to help someone be more successful in life. And so the action that I would define for everyone out there is do something today, do something this week that lifts someone else up in a small or large way, whether that's someone you work with, helping them solve a problem, or it's taking a step to give someone a leg up who's having a difficult time out there in the world. Figure out that right step for yourself to make someone else's life a little bit better.
Well, I think that's a really fantastic ask, Rob. I really appreciate you mentioning that and bringing that to the forefront here. In touch with you, Rob.
Well, of course, we're online at www.bscs.org, and my content and information is available on our website. But anyone is welcome to reach out to me by email directly. And it's my first initial and my last name at bscs.org.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Rob. Appreciate you being on the show today, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what's next for you guys, and continuing our conversation hopefully sooner than a year from now.
Stu, this is a lot of fun. Thanks for doing this today.
My pleasure. Thanks for being on the show. All right, there you have it. Another episode of Relish This, the Nonprofit Marketing Podcast. If you want to continue the conversation and see how we can unearth some gold for your organization, head over to relishstudio.com/podcast to sign up to be a guest on the show. That's it for this week. Thanks for listening. We'll be back soon with another episode of Relish This.